I'm Marisa Norcross.
And I'm Dave Freund, and this is The Next Page. Hi, Marisa.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going well.
Good.
I've turned the corner on my illness. My energy came back yesterday. Of course, it left me at 4:30 yesterday afternoon. But you know what? It's the time we're recording this today. It's 4:40, and I still have my energy. So see, it's at least I got 10 minutes stronger today.
Awesome.
Than before.
That's
and the voice is slowly coming back.
Great.
So how about with you?
Things are good. I always say this, if the sun is shining, I'm happy.
Yes.
And right now the sun is shining.
Sun is shining brightly.
I'm in my bright room where I record now, and I'm excited about spring.
Yeah, I am too. I actually drove home from work. Other than my portion on 481 and 81, I had my sunroof open.
Oh, wow. That's so nice.
Just the fresh air, the sunshine.
I know.
Beating down on me.
I love it.
It's awesome.
I took the girls to the zoo yesterday. It was...
Oh, cool.
It was like about 55 or 60 degrees. And
yep.
Isla just kept saying, "It's spring. The grass is here."
That's great. Well, it's getting greener little by little every day.
Yeah,
so.
it's my favorite.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love it. I was talking to my mom on the phone. You know, they're down in Florida still, and but by the time they come back, it's going to be perfect. That's when the trees are going to start to bud. And it's awesome. So we're going to talk about questions today.
Great.
The power of a question. And in the email that got posted, or the blog post, or we're going to call it, that went out this morning, I asked the question: have you ever thought about the power of a question? And questions are really priceless. Because think about life without any questions. Now, I know when you and I, shared a couple emails, you talked about that you're answering questions all day long from Isla.
What's that sound?
Yeah, what's that? What's that?
Why are you doing that?
and I know we've talked about it in the past, but if only we would develop the curiosity of a child. But that really wasn't the power of my question part here. But I believe that questions allow us to open up dialogue that really is vital to all human relationships. And so I shared 3 examples, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of this. But, the first example I used was, as a trainer, questions allow me to tap into what's happening in the minds of the folks in my class. Are they getting it? Questions allow me to draw them into the story that I'm trying to share, or the situation I'm trying to build, so that they can have a meaningful learning experience. When I coach, the beauty of coaching is that the answers are within the person. They just don't know it.
Right.
And at some point, we can dig into what some of those questions might be, but these questions really allow a person to think at a much deeper level than they normally would. I just had a meeting with someone just before I left work, and he was struggling with some self-limiting beliefs, and I just pushed back, and I said, "Why is that an issue? Why is that a problem?" And he just kind of looked. Well, I guess it's not, type of a thing, So sometimes just having somebody help you with a question brings immediate clarity to a situation. But the third example I used, which I think I'm going to say actually comes from the most important question I ever asked, which was, "Will you marry me?" was the questions that I ask as a husband, and what, when asking questions of my wife allows me to understand her at a deeper level. And I'm not, I don't sit down and with a whole list of questions, now do this. And I will say too, and I say it in my my post, that this is an area of my life where I struggle the most. I can be really sensitive and very, have a lot of authentic listening when I'm sitting with a coaching client, and completely forget that when I get home. So I need to work on this more. But as I was writing this, I realized if I really want to get to know my wife at a deeper level, I need to ask her deeper questions. If I want to know how her day's going, I need to ask. If I want to know what she's feeling, I need to ask. And then I thought about the same thing. So like with my kids, so all of our children are grown. I guess Tim's grown, right? If he's 22,
Tim's grown.
He's grown. All right. But he still lives at home while he's
Mm-hmm.
finishing up school, but when I interact with my kids, what kind of questions am I asking them?
Mm-hmm.
Not just, hey, how was your day? But remembering specific things and then asking them specific questions.
Right. I think questions are a great tool for any kind of engagement. And
they really are.
And it's not just how, the question and how you ask the question, but how you, are receiving the answer. So it's not just, well, I asked them questions, but you have to also think about, okay, am I like really listening to this person and learning and engaging with them? So that I would say especially applies to your training and your coaching, but also with any interaction. And I think, it can be as simple as, asking someone, how are you? And I think we're programmed to just think that they're going to respond and say, I'm, pretty good or not good. But we need to think about how we like ask those questions to really get an engagement and build relationship. And, and then when we're answering those questions too, respond with the same intention.
Right. Yeah, very good. As you were sharing that, I was thinking of a situation with a coaching client, and he's really, really trying. He knows that he needs to do a better job with asking questions. And so he's seen the data. He knows what people are thinking. So he's trying, and his people are saying he's trying. The problem is when I get my feedback from them in the 360, it's saying, we can see he's trying. We know he really, really wants to do better. However, it's like he already has the answer.
Mm-hmm.
So he's asking questions to check a box rather than asking questions to get the information. And when I shared some of the feedback with him, it was great how he picked up on that right away. And he said, my problem is, and I'm paraphrasing, this isn't exactly what he said. I don't remember his exact words. I wrote down some notes when I had a call with him. But he said, I'm asking the questions once I already know the answer. I need to ask the questions before I settle on an answer. And I think that's the key with a leader. The bosses ask the questions to check a box because they were told they should check the box. But a real leader knows that I ask the questions to get the information and open up the dialogue. And so that's what I'm seeing. When I see that, that's exciting because that means he gets it. So the questions that we ask really open up this dialogue and allow us to truly interact with people on a completely different level. So, Marisa, when you saw the title of this post, what was the first thought that went through your mind?
The first thought was that I had never really thought of that. Like the power of a question. I guess it's not something that I had considered before.
Sure.
But as I kept reading it, I realized that it's completely true. And I am someone who asks a lot of questions of anyone and everyone. Like you could be like the person at Wegmans that's checking out my groceries. I'm like, what do you, like if they think they're in school, like, what are you going to school for? What's your major? Whatever. I'll ask anyone anything. And then, when it comes to work, I always ask a lot of questions for clarification purposes.
Yeah.
I think I also just really like to talk, but I, as I'm talking through this with you, I can definitely see not just in a work situation, but in a personal situation where this is so critical.
Right. When I first sent you the blog post, there were some sample questions that I put here, and it had come to my mind, and one of them was, how do I want to spend my life?
Mm-hmm.
I think too often the world is so fast paced, life is so fast paced that we don't take the time to ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
And we're accepting a life that's being given to us rather than living a life according to, our purpose, our calling,
mm-hmm.
Our desires.
Right.
So taking time to say, how do I want to spend my life? Another note that I had here was, what do I want to be remembered for?
Mm-hmm. Our legacy is so important to consider.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll repeat, and I know I've said it on probably more than one podcast, but when one of my mentors said his goal in life is to have those that know him the best love and respect him the most.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's, as I looked at this question piece, yes, this is really important for leaders. Leaders, well, John Maxwell wrote the book, Good Leaders Ask Great Questions. I highly recommend it. But it's more important even for each individual as it relates to their life outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a relationship do I want to have with people, with my spouse, with my kids? What impact can I have in the world around me?
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions that I jotted down was, is it worth it, or was it worth it? You've heard me talk about it on the podcast, and you've shared, some of your dad's thoughts on this same thing, that
Mm-hmm.
that I don't remember my daughter as a toddler because I was at work. And so the great part was that by the time between Bethany and Tim, so Jeremy was in the mix too. And so, I remember a little bit more about Jeremy, but not
Mm-hmm.
much more.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a lot about Mike because we were living in a townhouse. So every evening we'd go for a walk, or we would go to the mall and we'd go for a walk in the wintertime. Not every evening, but frequently. But I had to look back, and when I realized I don't have these memories, was it worth it that I spent all those hours at work?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was no. The company would have been fine had I gone home at 5:00 instead of staying evenings and Saturdays trying to, probably make a name for myself. That's probably what, some of the time when I was hourly, it was to get more money. I'll work whatever hours you'll let me because it increases my earnings.
Right.
But I think we have to ask these questions. Is it worth it?
Mm-hmm.
Is making this decision, going down this path, going to be worth it? And I've often said, if it's going to damage your character, if it's going to take time away from your family, the answer is no, because our time is so limited.
Right.
So then while we were talking, I jotted down another note here. So why don't we ask questions?
Probably, depending on the situation, we're afraid.
Yep. Afraid of the answer.
Afraid of the answer. Afraid that it's a bad question or a stupid question, or
yeah, we don't want to sound stupid. I had that problem in school.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't understand things, but I was so afraid that I would look stupid that I didn't ask the question. And it's kind of ironic, because what that really means is I was more concerned with looking stupid than being stupid.
Mm.
Because if I'd asked the question, I might have learned something.
And I think sometimes sometimes we don't ask questions because we think we know the answer.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Or we want the answer to be something specific, and if we think it might not be that, we just don't ask.
Very good. Yeah. I think the other thing is, well, and maybe you touched on this, we don't ask a question because we're afraid of the answer, because the answer might actually be reflecting back on us.
Mm-hmm.
So, I remember once, and I don't think I ever shared this on a podcast, but I was concerned that something was bothering my wife. And I even asked Tim, I said, hey, did you notice? And she was just very quiet. And I said, well, we better lay low, which, like, now there's a really smart thing for a husband to say, right? So, and whenever I share this example every now and then in my classes, and I said, so after 3 weeks, and everybody there's excuse me, there's more coughing. There's this gasp, like, you waited 3 weeks? Well, I kept thinking it was going to get better, so I didn't ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
So then I asked the question, is everything okay? And the answer was no. And I don't remember anymore what the scenario was. She may remember it, she may not. Oh, she'll let me know when she listens to the podcast. But then the funny part was, like, well, not funny. The tragic part was the next question I asked was, "Is it me?"
Mm-hmm.
So there's the perfect reason why I didn't ask earlier. Is I thought it was me.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we don't ask a question because we're afraid of the answer.
Mm-hmm.
But then the next question I asked was, and then she told me what it was. And I don't remember what the concern was, but she had a concern weighing on her heart. And then I said, "Why didn't you say something?" And she just, and you know how sweet she is. She just said, "You didn't ask."
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't ask.
Mm-hmm.
So why am I not asking? Am I not asking questions because
Mm-hmm.
I'm selfish? That I'm afraid it might be me?
Mm-hmm.
Had it been me, I could have addressed it 3 weeks earlier. So again, it's this fear of asking the questions that really matter. I think about we're past the teen years with our kids, but parents with teenagers, are we establishing a good enough relationship through questions on an ongoing basis that we can say, "Hey, is everything okay? You seem troubled today."
Mm-hmm.
When we see our coworkers, can we pick up on the fact that something's not right and say, "Hey, is everything okay? Would you like to talk about it?" Those are just like simple questions that can unlock some really deep doors,
Mm-hmm.
or deep open doors to some really deep conversations that really need to be asked.
Right.
So as you think about this topic, are there any great questions that come to your mind, or questions that you think we should ask?
I think
There's a curveball I just threw you.
Yeah, a question about questions. Are you referring to things we ask ourselves or things that we ask others?
Yes. Just questions in
Either?
general. Yeah, either.
So one thing, you kind of already touched on this, but I always keep in the back of my mind, like, where do I want to be when I'm 80 years old? And
Yeah.
and it can be any number, right? Like,
Sure.
77, how old do I,
Right.
well, it doesn't matter. But when you ask yourself those types of questions on a regular basis, you're thinking about your future and about how what you're doing now will inevitably impact where you are when you're 80. So
Yes.
that is certainly one that I like to keep in the back of my head. And then also on a daily basis, I think I'm always asking myself, like, does this matter? Like, is this important? Or am I just thinking it's important right now? Like, so my daughter, my daughter doesn't want to wear the outfit that I picked out for her. And we might start a little power struggle. Like, I want you to wear this because we're going to go out. I'd like you to wear this. And she wants to wear her pajamas. And it's like, is it that important? Is it worth getting worked up over? Is it worth potentially ruining our morning over? And the answer is no, it's not. Move on. And I think that we can manage our emotions and manage our anxieties that way by, in any situation, just thinking, like, is this that important to me?
Right.
Will this impact, is it just impacting me right now? Or is it going to impact my family or other people or my future?
Yeah. Those are great.
And then I think when we ask ourselves questions, similar to sometimes having the fear of asking questions, we're afraid to even ask ourselves questions or get beyond, we might come up with the question, but choose not to answer it because we don't want it. We don't want the answer. So I think going back to what we've talked about, the last few weeks with journaling, that can be helpful in keeping some kind of goal planner to keep the future in mind and answer those questions that pop across your mind all day long.
That's awesome. And some of these questions, you'll just have to revisit.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing that happened with the individual I was meeting with just before I left to come home and record the podcast. Because he was journaling, he saw some patterns,
mm-hmm.
and that caused him to ask some questions,
mm-hmm.
which I thought was great.
Yeah.
And as you were sharing those your thoughts about questions, on top of my table here where I have my microphone clamped, was some notes that I had from when I was in Orlando a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the topic that I was on was, that I was attending was, how do you build a growth plan,
mm-hmm.
a growth matrix? And the paperwork that they gave us is just a series of questions. And one of them, which I thought was kind of interesting, so I'm looking at the left-hand side of this chart: faith, family, marriage, business, mentorship, personal growth, mentoring, and then, a pausing time, which is like reflection. And it was what's right, what's wrong, what's missing, what's confusing. So in each of these areas, you start asking yourself, what is right? So if we use marriage, what's right with my marriage right now? What's wrong with my marriage right now? What's missing? And what might be confusing?
Mm-hmm.
And so, or with my family. So what's right with my family now? And by answering these questions that you ask yourself, you then can look at you can pull out the things, the what's wrong, what's missing, what's confusing. How do I answer those questions? And then you naturally build a growth plan that will fit in all of those areas of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really liked about this course that I was sitting through was it wasn't just business focused.
Right.
It was really, how do you build a life plan?
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was real. For me, it was really inspiring to think about that. So I think there was one other sheet here. Oh yeah, here we go. These are some questions that are really great. And I think a lot of these questions may fit right nice into or flow naturally out of the book, Intentional Living. What makes you sing? What fulfills you?
Mm-hmm.
What makes you cry? Or what convicts you? What makes you dream, which is what inspires you? And what makes you alive? What is it that inspires others through you? And if you think about just those questions can really help us bring clarity, I think, to our life.
Yeah.
And help us dial into, I guess you'd call it a purpose.
Right.
For life.
Mm-hmm.
So questions are far more important than I think any of us have ever thought, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've sold questions short.
Yeah.
There's just one other thing I want to touch on before we wrap up, and is, how do questions make others feel? So I think we could all agree that if we're questioned in an improper way, it makes us feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we think we're being interrogated, that's not good. But, from your experience, so how do you feel when people are asking you questions about you and your life and things you've done? How does it make you feel?
I mean, it makes me feel like people care. And
Yeah.
especially now in my new role at MACNY, I don't see everyone as often. So when I talk to them on the phone or I see them in person and they ask me questions, it's like, okay, good, I haven't been forgotten.
Right.
And we are able to maintain that relationship that we had from working together in the office for 4 years.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that if people ask us the right kinds of questions with the right intent,
right,
or the right emotions, it makes us feel valued.
Mm-hmm.
I think last time I said that we were having dinner guests that evening, and there were 3 couples that came.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really tried to do was ask each of the couples questions that would give them an opportunity to share something about their life.
Mm-hmm.
These are all 3 couples were, I think, in their early 70s, early to mid 70s, just good friends of ours from our church.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know that much about what's going on in their life, and I didn't know
Right.
that much about their history. And this just, I think it made them feel valued.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that I had a list of questions and I was checking the box. But ever since I read the book, Good Leaders Ask Great Questions,
Mm-hmm.
the year that it was released, I've realized that I used to spend way too much time talking about myself
Mm-hmm.
rather than asking other people. And when you're around a person and all they want to do is talk about themselves, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
They're so wrapped up in themselves that you'd rather not be around them.
Right. And if they
So
are
asking
asking you questions, they might not even be listening for your answer.
Right. They may just be trying to shut me up. So really asking questions makes us likable.
Mm-hmm.
So we learn something. We open up dialogue with other human beings. So we're learning things. We're relating at a deeper level. And you know what? We're actually making ourselves likable.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Sounds like I've
Powerful.
still sold. Yeah, there's the power of a question. That's probably the best way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So anything, the sun is out, anything exciting this weekend?
Yes, I'm actually taking Isla to see a musical that my cousin is in.
Awesome.
It's like a middle school production of Hairspray.
Oh, that's going to be great.
Yeah, she's really excited. It's her first show, so I'm excited.
Going to the theater
That's
with
what
Mom.
I keep telling you. We're going to the theater.
Going to the theater with Mom.
Uh-huh.
That's great.
Yeah.
Super. Well, I think I'm just going to be still laying a bit low, trying to save my voice and get caught up on some chores. But you know what? That's still going to be a wonderful
Sounds great too.
Weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the last time I said I thought maybe my kids would come, granddaughter and grandkids would be coming, and she got called for jury duty, so she couldn't come.
Aww.
So she's sitting on a trial, and we'll hear all about it when she's done. But next time.
All right.
And I have no idea what we're talking about next week.
Surprise us.
But you'll know by Monday. How's that?
Sounds good.
All right. So just a reminder to folks, please, questions. Send us questions. Let us know something you'd like us to answer. Any question, because we're, as we get closer, this is episode 94. As we get closer to episode 100, we want to do something a little special. We want to answer any questions anybody has that they'd like to know about us, about MACNY, about whatever. It's going to be like, you ask it and we'll answer it. So please, in the show notes is all of our contact information. Send us a question. Also, please don't forget to subscribe and write us a review, because that allows the next page to get a wider distribution. So with that, I'm Dave Freund.
I'm Marisa Norcross.
And this was The Next Page.